structure of the firm. So let's start. The main goal of our research was to identify the mechanisms that influence the creation of manager social capital that actually enables knowledge transfer. So we looked at that problem with regard to the specific context of the Croatian transition economy and everything that goes along with it, especially the large stake of state-owned companies that are present in the Croatian business sector, but in that region in general. So the focus of our research was actually to look at the reasons of why managers build their social capital and how they mobilize it with regard to the company's ownership structure. So basically we wanted to understand the process, and we came up with the following research questions, as you can see here. So we wanted to know what affects the creation of social capital needed for knowledge transfer. How is social capital of Croatian managers maintained? How does the firm's ownership structure affect the way its managers create social capital? And how does the firm's ownership structure affect the way managers' social capital is maintained? These are some of the assumptions known to us from literature review. So there is this proposition that the ease of knowledge transfer is the key mechanism underlying firm performance. Some authors think that. We believe so as well. The main advantage of social capital is actually information. So social capital provides access, timely access to information. It improves the quality, relevance of information. Thus, it brings new knowledge. But not just it brings new knowledge, it also makes people aware of the necessity to come up with new knowledge. As social capital is woven into social relationships and relationships are created through an exchange, it can be said that social capital facilitates the process of sharing knowledge resources. So the methodology we used was qualitative research methodology, which we came up with after realizing what our research questions are and the fact that we want to understand the process of how managers in Croatia mobilize their social capital in order to gain relevant information. So our study was based on 18 interviews with managers coming from 12 different companies, where we interviewed 10 managers from privately owned companies and 8 managers from state-owned companies. As you know, in many transition countries, the state, the government is still heavily involved with ownership in the business sector. So the method we used was open-ended interviews. Actually, we used the interview guide approach, and this qualitative method we used is said to be person-oriented, not variable-oriented, as it is with quantitative research. So the advantages of using the qualitative research is that there is no predetermination that is characterized with quantitative research methods. So as we believe, the advantages is that we don't offer our respondents answer. We don't offer the framework into which they have to put their ideas, perceptions, emotions. So we don't suggest them the answers. And that way we gain insight into their perceptions and everything that interests us around the concept that we are researching without imposing our prejudice onto our respondents, and without creating answers towards our images of how this should be like. So during our qualitative data analysis, we came up with 12 meta-categories or codes of data. It basically underlie the words, phrases, and sentences that our respondents frequently used. So that is the codes we came up with. Basically, trust, emotional compatibility that seem to be very highly mentioned, or we understood it, that emotional compatibility was very important to the managers we interviewed. Cognitive compatibility, perception, integrity, expectations, social network, one position of corporate control, more positions of corporate control, management in the position of corporate control, state in position of corporate control, and of course, knowledge transfer. So our research, as many research before, has confirmed once again that social capital is crucial for organizational knowledge trajectory flows. So also, our research showed there are differences in the way social capital is created and used depending on the entity which holds the position of corporate control. It is actually one of our main contributions. So what we realized is that managers from state-owned companies didn't emphasize that they use their social capital for knowledge transfer to the same extent as managers in privately owned companies did. We believe that that is because the trust level in those organizations seems to be lower, but actually that wasn't topic of our research, and I believe that can be investigated more in some future research projects. Also, we found there is a lack of transparency in state-owned companies, especially when it comes to employing new workers. And what we found, as I said before, managers use different mechanisms to manage their social capital and to embed themselves in their position. So after we deconstructed the narratives of our interview, we came up with the code, right? So, and we then constructed this model of social capital building. And we realized that the dominant mechanisms of managerial entrenchment are social reciprocity, so trust building, and opportunism. And the way managers entrench themselves in the position of high status, power, and income can be done through development and maintenance of good relationships with existing shareholders, with creating and development of good relationships with other board members, also creating relationships within the company, so other employees within the company, as well as creating good relationships with external shareholders, stakeholders, and the public. Those strategies are dependent on the types of relationship between the manager and the entity in with corporate control. And the biggest difference is between whether it is concentrated corporate control, where the state owns the majority of the stocks, or it's a privately owned company. Then it differs whether there is fragmented corporate control, where the state partially owns part of the company, or the company is entirely privately owned, and whether the manager himself has corporate control. So in privately owned companies, where there is one entity in position of corporate control, or one person, the manager maintains close relationship with the owner. And we realized that the relationship is based on trust and social responsibility, reciprocity, and with high levels of emotional and cognitive compatibility. And that can be illustrated by the following quote from one of our interviews. So this manager obviously is very cognitively, emotionally similar to the owner of his company. As he said, the owner has moral principles, views, that he has such a nature, he's not willing to walk over the body, and he's glad that he shares essential moral values with the person who owns the company that this respondent manages. Next, in privately owned companies with fragmented ownership, we found that managers build their relationships with different stakeholding groups. So it can be done through connections with other members of the board, with connections with external stakeholders, or through good relationship within the company. These are some of the quotes that confirm those assumptions. So managers X7 said that he maintains his position, entrenches himself through some sponsors, as he puts it, that can be a high-ranking politician or some other person. X2 believes created his relationships with, he says, the mayor, relationships with the county, with all possible state inspectors. Manager X5 actually became CEO of the company in 1995, and he was able to affect the employment structure of the entire company, and that is one of the ways he entrenched himself in his position. In state-owned companies, we realize there are a lot of problems, so to say. Of course, their managers keep good relationships with the entity of imposition of corporate control, which is the government or the party group. The problem is, as we see it, that the government appoints all board members in state-owned companies without a public center. And now a little bit about corporate governance in Croatia, just to illustrate why we believe that there is a necessity to change corporate governance practices in state-owned companies in Croatia, but in the Balkan region in general. The situation is very similar to Croatia. So it's a closed system of corporate governance where managers rarely hold the position of corporate control. The largest shareholder owns on average around 50% of the company. Almost 20% of the companies are predominantly state-owned, and 1/3 of all the listed companies have major state-owned by the state. So in the period between 1993 and 2010, state-owned companies achieved a profit of 130 million euros, but the debt they created is really high. As you can see, 4.2 billion in government subsidies and plus 8 billion in state guarantees. So to conclude, due to the closed nature of the system of corporate governance, high concentration of ownership, managers build their relationships with the owners and companies because of their relatively low number. Also, we realized that the relationships they create are mostly affective relationships, as opposed to cognitive relationships, which are shown to be more present in, for example, among American managers. We believe that one of the reasons why state-owned companies perform so poorly is because of the way managers acquire their position and then entrench themselves, which is basically through their social capital through political connections. And also we found that regardless of the nature of the business, state-owned companies don't use their social capital in the most productive manner if we take society as a whole into account. That would be it.
Are there many social capitals or social companies in your country?
Maybe I wasn't clear.
How many social companies or social capitals?
Well, the companies we investigated in aren't actually. You mean like social entrepreneurship?
Yeah, and
no. These are companies we went into or the managers we interviewed are coming from a variety of industries.
Okay, I understand. Yeah.
This is a remark because it's a very big perennial question for qualitative or actually any research, but especially qualitative. If you interview the managers, you tacitly assume that they know, okay? And sometimes people do certain things or reach certain effect without knowing what they are doing, okay? Without knowing that it was because of trust, without knowing that it was about emotional, without identifying the proper factor, without perceiving, you know what I mean? Sometimes you achieve high level of performance and you cannot actually identify why it happened. And it might happen because people trust each other, but the manager might not know that, okay? If you ask them. And so then, because qualitative study is designed, and it's wonderful because we can discover new factors. But I was thinking that perhaps as a follow-up or something, you could think of also including elements of either observation or other sources of information than just interview, because then you could just measure the state of mind of the managers, not the reality. Of course, I mean it's interesting per se, but still there's a little. I mean, I also face that problem. That's why I share it, because I do a lot of qualitative study as well.
Well, I can say, but the constructivist theoretical approach that we come from claims that there is no objectivity, there is no objective truth we can discover. So even if we use a quantitative research, I don't think it's the objective truth that we come up with.
I don't think that either, but still, whether it's constructivist or not, what you get to know is what those guys think that happened.
Yeah.
But you don't get the interpretation of other actors. You don't get it's just you should just be aware of the bias, because there is certain bias.
Of course.
I'd probably make it explicit if you didn't, because I didn't read it.
Yeah. I'm aware, but we don't think that they know. Of course, you don't ask them directly, do you trust, or
I know,
you
but
pose questions and then you let them talk and kind of direct them.
Right.
But in many cases, as I showed you in the quotes, they use the terms, phrases, where you realize that actually emotional and cognitive compatibility is something that the relation they have with the identity that holds corporate control.
What I'm saying is also because managers are not savages somewhere, so they are also influenced by the narratives that are in the air, okay? So the narrative on knowledge management of social capital, okay? So it is somewhere, okay? So again, they produce certain narratives you should be aware you should probably mention that what you're talking about is their perception and their decision-making process rather than anything more. Although it's a perennial question, it's not a criticism because of.
No, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I know it's.
May I join, because I'm also doing qualitative work, and I think it all depends on the unit of analysis. If you're trying to get somebody else's opinion, you're satisfied with somebody else's opinion. If you're trying to study somebody else's or organizational practice, then there's a leap much further to make. Because you need to reconstruct the organizational practice based on the actors that were involved in experiencing or conducting that practice. So then you need to cross-reference many opinions at a particular point in time. And for instance, usually critical incident technique or some kind of event that you ask to describe many actors helps to draw things to a particular center. And for instance, you've recently acquired a new company. Tell me about this experience. You ask HR manager, you ask the director, you ask everybody else to describe in their own words how they saw the acquisition process taking place. So perhaps then it could, to some extent, create this basis for generalization, though you would say, or for some sort of conclusion. But I fully agree with what you're saying, but perhaps that could be something that could serve as an anchor of a qualitative work along observation, along other methods. But observation is also a qualitative method. It's not going to say qualitative faith.
I mean, I don't want to say that if you conducted a survey and then computed that would be more close to truth. Okay, I didn't mean that.
I have a slightly different question. Based on your research, when you analyzed your data, did you come up with next research questions that kind of raised your curiosity? What would you like to do as a follow-up of this?
Well, I'd like to go more into different nature of different industries and look at how that affects the way managers entrench themselves and build on their social capital. I think that might have a great influence into how people build their relationships.
So what's your hypothesis? That there'll be a difference based on different industry the companies are in how they...
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, unfortunately we don't have much time for the questions. This presentation is from Irina Ifkad, Bridging Knowledge Management and Human Resource Management.
May I go with this?
Yeah.
It's not going to damage. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Irina, and I'm representing a team of two. It's always nice to write a paper with a friend. Celan is my friend. We did a PhD together under supervision of one supervisor. We're both graduates of Lancaster University. So we've decided to put some heads together and use our friendship in a productive academic way. Today I will try to introduce you to some ideas that we're developing along the side of knowledge management and HR practices. But we come from the knowledge management camp, so we try to draw in some HR practices into the knowledge management debate. So we're not discussing very extensively HR practices per se. I would like to begin by telling two stories. Well, by setting the context, probably, of our research. This paper is a slice of a wider research of looking into the knowledge management practices of companies. And this is, as I've mentioned, it's an HR slice, so it's a particular layer that we've taken amongst other layers. There were some operational layers and HR practices. There were some strategic and owner issues in HR practices. So this one particularly focuses on HR and knowledge management. And the research took place and the data collection took place qualitatively, so I could associate with all the hardships of collecting data and making sense of it. We use a matched pair technique, so both companies that we represent here have been matched by the size, the ownership, the age, so we could, to some extent, compare them. Having some decent grounds for comparison, these two companies. They're both in the same industry, and that industry is a physiotherapy and cure centers in Turkey. It was lovely. Very nice site to do research. It was an explorative study, so very much looking for, not knowing what we're looking for, just trying to embed ourselves into what organizations do and try to learn some practices, some good ideas, and in order to become more knowledgeable of how knowledge management can be conducted from various entry points and angles. I would like to continue by telling the two stories of the two hotels, the two cure centers. One is the Dolphin Hotel, another is the Seahorse Hotel. The names are not real, so don't Google them. Most likely you won't be able to find. However, the real names are available. And because it's an HR slice, the stories are going to focus around training and curriculum design. Training is an HR practice that is often used by HR professionals. The second, performance and evaluation management. Performance and evaluation, feedback mechanisms, very much HR practices, what HR managers do. And the last one is slightly untraditional HR practice, but it was conducted by HR professionals in both of these hotels, and in particular, developing a new quality system. Both of the hotels were facing with ISO standardization. Therefore, they've delegated to their HR professionals to design those systems. So that was an HR issue in those particular hotels. So Dolphin, very much successful company, loves its people, people are happy working there, offers opportunities for training for those people. What kind of opportunities? They have a list of universities, of university courses, of consulting courses, of training courses, of ministry courses, Ministry of Tourism of Turkey, that their employees are free to enroll in and improve, engage with their skills development. So the process is that employee comes into the HR manager, and HR manager gives a list of a variety of courses that employee chooses from, goes on the training, comes back, and acquires new knowledge, brings in some new experience to put into the practice. At the Seahorse Hotel, slightly different practice. They engage their employees, they encourage their employees to find courses themselves and bring those courses to HR manager at Seahorse Hotel, which then, signs off the sheet as so employee goes on and learns new things, comes back, and after that, employees are engaged in the process of a backward learning loop. They tell everybody else, they have a presentation, like we're having right now, sharing our experiences of what they've learned and how they're planning to implement that learning at that particular company. There's also a research club that is engaged around that practice, that collects people who got inspired by a particular idea at a particular training and they really want to implement it at the Seahorse Hotel. So they're chewing on the idea a little bit longer. With regards to evaluation and performance, both hotels have a standardized IT system of checking in and checking out patients. And every employee, especially nurses and doctors, are evaluated on their ability to cure certain diseases or certain conditions that people check in and check out with. So you check in into the hotel, your blood pressure, everything is being measured, everything that needs to be measured when you check into a hospital, but it's a slightly more relaxing environment. Then all kinds of procedures are being done to you by doctors and nurses. They're all recorded next to the names of people who prescribe these procedures, who conducted those procedures, results, etc., etc. All the information is recorded into that database. And then, as a patient, you check out, and hopefully your results are much better. Then, feedback and reward system kicks in. You get your bonus. Everybody's happy, but not always the curement works, or there might be some failures, so to speak, and there's the danger zone, so to speak. So both hotels have these check-in and check-out systems for their patients. They are managed by doctors and by HR professionals. And at the Dolphin Hotel, the performance evaluation of a particular doctor or a nurse is in the hands of a medical superintendent. He gets into the database, puts in the name, Irina, how did she treat somebody else? And there is my story. I succeeded here. I didn't succeed here.
he or she, a medical superintendent, writes an evaluation progress form, fills out based on my performance, recorded in that database system, sends off to HR, or negotiates with HR with regards to whether to punish me, or reward me, or maybe promote me, or maybe send me to some educational course, etc., etc. Seahorse Hotel, the same system. When during the process of evaluating and providing feedback to employees, they get together. Medical superintendent, often even the managerial, the top management staff, nurses, doctors, everybody sits together in a room and they go case by case. Case by case, discussing what worked, what didn't work, why things worked. Everybody has a chance to speak, to discuss what happened in a particular situation, why things might have failed, or maybe didn't fail, or succeeded, etc. Last big experience of knowledge creation, very interesting practice. ISO standardization, all Turkish hotels are required to have that in order to especially attract European Union customers. In the first instance, Dolphin Hotel Googled ISO, got some ideas from the Ministry of Education, put in the document together, done, working. Seahorse Hotel, they sent an HR professional down, let's say to their kitchen. They worked, HR people worked in the kitchen trying to understand where the quality problems might arise and developed together, based on that, a quality system tailored for Seahorse practices. So, very different practices. In both cases, I would like to draw your attention, there are successful hotels. In both cases, things work, but obviously they do things slightly differently. If you right now try to look at it through the knowledge management angle, or try to draw some of the knowledge management out of this, how organizations deal with that, well, two main strategies come to mind, or two main knowledge management strategies help to make sense of what is happening. Codification and personalization knowledge management strategy. Not our idea, borrowed idea, but very much it seems relevant to this particular discussion. On the one hand side, codification knowledge management strategy describes when organizations are driven by managing explicit knowledge. Nothing bad about that. Often use databases, intranet, things that can help managing explicit knowledge. Manages things through human behavior, punishment, reward and punishment of HR practices. Often people to document approach. If we remember, let's say, the Dolphin practice of feedback and reward, right? People to document very much. Or another knowledge management strategy that tries to engage a bit of this mess of the tacit knowledge. When people sit down, discuss, review, get together, communities of practice, very much bottom-up, very much engaged. A lot of the person-to-person social interaction where communities create knowledge and discuss ideas together and hence make some plans of progressing or of doing things in the future. Where HR practitioners, they create an environment or enable an environment for these practices to come about. So the main idea that we're drawing here, maybe even the next slide, no, let's stick with the previous one, I'm sorry, is that the traditional HR practices that we all know about, hiring, recruitment, managing, reward, commitment, motivation, are currently being used in order to serve the codification knowledge management strategy. Because they're focusing on managing individual behavior. They're less focused on engaging social environment, like certain practices, let's say communities of practice, or parallel learning sessions, or even action learning groups. They usually are not part of HR discourse within an organization. It's much easier to acquire knowledge through hiring. It's much more straightforward. That's what HR people have been doing. It's much easier to enable knowledge sharing or knowledge creation through commitment and motivation or job security. This is what HR professionals have been doing so far. However, this serves only part of the knowledge management picture. And the most difficult parts of this social interaction are not currently, are in the no man's land. And they're not taken into account by HR professionals who are supposedly, sort of the hub of the knowledge. They're people who deal, this is the part of their organization that actually deals with people. And what we call for in our paper is to expand the HR roles of becoming more of a knowledge brokers, participants, shop floor engagement, accounting for context rather than only behaviors, enabling knowledge creation rather than only knowledge transfer, focusing on social rather than individual management or in addition to individual management, and account for tacit in addition to explicit knowledge. And here the gains are for both camps. For knowledge management to get its official outlet into the organization because there's often no knowledge management place within the company, and for the HR to regain its credibility within place because it's often seen as somebody are being managed by HR, I'm not a part of it, and regain its strategic position within the company. So it's a win-win situation for both. So thank you very much for your attention. And
It was time for a couple of questions. Come on, don't be shy.
I've been asking too many questions during this conference. Come on.
Reciprocate.
Well, I'll be happy to discuss something if somebody else would be interested in discussing something after. Yes, please.
I have a question regarding the management of human behavior as a strategy. To what extent? Can you turn 2 slides back?
Yes?
Yeah, I think yes. Manage knowledge by managing human behavior. So do you have any views on how you can be successful on that? Because we all know that human behavior is not that easy to be managed strategically on the long run. So
It's not very easy, but that's a main assumption that HR is operationalizing at this moment. They manage our behavior as employees. They want us to do something, and they do it with the help of HR tools that are available to them. And with reward mechanisms, with motivating us, some speeches or some team building exercises. They provide us with job security, they give us a package, they give us a medical package when we're getting employed. These are all HR mechanisms, but they're focused only at me. Let's say at me as an individual, as an employee. So they're trying to manage my behavior within the company to increase my productivity within the company.
And have you paid attention? Have you studied the well-being in these companies, or are there any?
The general satisfaction, we have been asking that during, yes, there is general satisfaction of employees of being a part of that organization. And the companies are both successful, so both systems work. And we're in no way trying to argue that one system is better than the other. It's the complementarity that works. What we're arguing is that perhaps there should be a wider range of activities that in HR repertoire. It's not that they have to drop everything and start doing things very differently. No, hiring, recruitment, reward management, it's all very important. But in order to serve knowledge management in its full spectrum, knowledge management, especially as a competitive resource, what we've been talking about, the resource that is often tacit, is often invisible, we invite HR specialists to consider other roles. Yes,
Irina, I was struck when I read your paper already about the mechanism where they use the medical officer to decide on the customer's health performance. I mean, use the health performance as a factor to determine my performance as an individual, if I'm a nurse or a doctor. Did I understand that correctly?
Well, the mechanism works that there are systems, like in the hospital, you give the blood pressure and everything, so it's being recorded. Then you're being treated.
Okay. But if my health is poorly, that's why I'm coming to you. But as an effect of that, I will not, for all kinds of other medical factors, my health will not improve during the stay at this hotel. But it will produce, through your HR practice in one hotel, a bad performance rating.
Yes,
For the
to
nurses
some
and
extent.
the
Yeah.
doctors who just happen to have me as their client.
To
Was
some
there
extent,
any-
yes.
Was there any feedback from
I would have to ask Selin over the cup of coffee, because she's our Turkish gateway to this, and whatever they could say in English isn't what they could have said in Turkish. So unfortunately, I'm not as close to the data as I could have been, because I'm sort of an additional bolt
It
to
made
this
such
research.
a point, my point is, coming from HR practice, it made a perfect illustration for your scenario.
It is.
But it may not be the whole story of the
It may not be. That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
the presentation. José Maria Biegman from the University of Catalonia. I'm going to present a paper on application in knowledge economy, reflection on the cases of Spain and Portugal.
As everybody knows, we are facing in the peripheral countries of the European Union very difficult situations. And Ireland, Greece, the worst country, then comes Ireland, Portugal, Spain, and I will try to give you some reflections on my practical research, trying to analyze what happens in Spain and Portugal and what could be done in order to improve the situation of these two economies. First, the structure of the paper is the following. I will talk about the knowledge economy, very briefly definitions and characteristics because everybody knows. Then in the paper has two parts, the theoretical part and the second part is the application part of the theory and the methodologies that we will deduce in the first part to the practical case of Spain and Portugal. Then after the definition of the knowledge economy, I will talk about principles and theories of wealth creation in the knowledge economy, who creates wealth, how wealth is created. Then I will relate the concept of wealth creation with the concept of competitiveness. And in this theoretical part, finally, I will talk about methodologies and frameworks for diagnosing competitiveness or wealth creation potential of regions and nations in the knowledge economy. This is the theoretical part. And then, very briefly, I will give some ideas, I will give you some reflections on the crisis of Spain and Portugal. Well, let's go knowledge economy definitions and characteristics. Very briefly, everybody knows what's the knowledge economy. It's one in which the generation and exploitation of knowledge has come to play the predominant part in the creation of wealth. Economic success is increasingly based upon the effective utilization of intangible assets such as knowledge, skills, innovative potential. Everybody knows it. And principles and theories of wealth creation in the knowledge economy. You will find this in a new book I will publish next October. This is already announced in Amazon, Barnes & Noble. And the title of the book is Entrepreneurial Excellence in the Knowledge Economy. These principles are detailed in the introduction of the book. Let's go quickly to those principles. Wealth. Who creates wealth in the knowledge economy? Wealth and poverty of a specific nation is strongly dependent on the number of competitive or excellent companies that the specific nation has. This is fundamental. Government does not create wealth, but contributes to facilitate or to hinder wealth creation. An excellent or competitive company is the one that achieves long-term extraordinary profits due to the fact that it has a business model with sustainable competitive advantages. In the knowledge economy, sustainable competitive advantages are mainly based on intelligence. And in order to achieve business excellence, the strategy perspective is the key one. And business excellence is always due to good strategy formulation and superior strategy implementation. It's always a human task. And in a continuous changing environment, business models quickly get out of date. So innovation in business models becomes an urgent need. When I say business model, I consider in this particular context that innovation in business model encompasses all types of innovations, including products, services, process, technical, management, everything. And companies alone do not create wealth. They need to be active part of a territorial open innovation system. Well, these are the principles of wealth creation in the knowledge economy. We know now who creates wealth and how wealth is created. Then wealth creation and competitiveness. The concept of competitiveness definition is the degree to which a country can, under free and fair market conditions, produce goods and services which meet the test of international markets, while simultaneously maintaining and expanding the real incomes of its people over the long term. Wealth creation and competitiveness are two very close concepts. Some more basic theory just to complete this vision. That's from Garelli. Nations themselves do not compete, rather their enterprises do. And competition among nations can be seen in the areas of education and know-how. In a modern economy, nations do not rely only on products and services, they also compete with trades. And a little bit more of theory, in this particular case from Porter. Wealth is actually created in the microeconomic level, of the economy. Wealth can only be created by firms. More than 80% of the variation of gross domestic product per capita across countries is accounted for by microeconomic fundamentals. Unless microeconomic capabilities improve, macroeconomic, political, legal and social reforms will not bear full fruit. As you probably realize, most of the analysis we have now of all these countries, Italy included, are based only not on the micro perspective, but on the macro perspective. Public deficit, current account deficit, but nothing about companies, nothing about clusters, nothing about what the company is good doing, for example, in producing software, or which are the main companies that the company has. Then methodologies and frameworks for diagnosing competitiveness or wealth creation potential of regions and nations in the knowledge economy. There are the main frameworks are the competitiveness frameworks, the World Economic Forum competitiveness framework, and the IMD competitiveness framework. In our community, the AC community, has also invented some frameworks that mainly are based on the Scandia Navigator model that has been transplanted from the micro dimension to the macro dimension. And some concentrate on knowledge and knowledge creation and innovation. And finally, there is the methodology that I invented, that's the NICS. NICS means National Intellectual Capital Benchmarking System, that tries to integrate the two set of frameworks and consider both perspectives, the micro and the macroeconomic perspective. So that's the framework of World Economic Forum with different indicators. The IC community contributions are summarized in the book that I recommend, National Intellectual Capital, from Carol Lynn and Larry Atkinson. And these are the different IC communities, contribution, and the different models that are described in the first part of the book. And now let's go to my methodology, the NICS, National Intellectual Capital Benchmarking System, that has two parts. The lower part that deals with macroeconomic stability, that's called National Competitiveness Intellectual Capital Platform. And the upper part, where wealth is created, where there are the different clusters, where there are the companies that create 80% of the wealth. Current economic analysis of OECD and International Monetary Forum, they concentrate in this 20%. Practically, they concentrate on sustainability. But nobody deals with the 80%. That's to say, with the clusters. And what is NICS, National Intellectual Capital Benchmarking System? Is a learning strategy tool that helps nation regions and the microclusters within them to lead their way to a more competitive knowledge economy. And what does NICS aim at? Enabling the diagnosis of the nation's actual knowledge-driven competitiveness foundation, aiding in the definition of possible vision, objectives and lines of action to embrace sustainable economic growth, and developing awareness of a nation's potential risks and opportunities. It's a strategy analysis tool. And, but because if I want to apply my methodology to the practical cases of Spain and Portugal and Italy, I need some information, and the best studies, existing studies, are the World Economic Forum studies. So what I did is to integrate the World Economic Forum competitiveness framework in my framework. So that produces that new National Intellectual Capital Benchmarking System, and the lower part of the model, where there is the platform, these are all the indicators of the World Economic Forum report. That we have all that information for Italy, for Spain, for what? 2 minutes.
10 minutes left for presentation.
2 minutes. Yeah. So I will go quickly.
Sorry.
Well, and then reflections on the cases of Spain and Portugal. We will reflect maybe later on drinking outside. That's the model applied to the case of Spain. We see there is 12% construction, 70% industry, 66% services and private sector. And this model allows to analyze what happens in the macroeconomic perspective. And then the more information on the global competitiveness index in Spain. And that's a little bit about Spain, you know. Different things you do very well, there's tourism. And the bullfights, and you know, and the Messi.
Oh.
And that's a metaphor of the sheep. That you see,
Beautiful.
where the chip has all the information, and the current economic analysis of Spain focus on macro indicators, but they don't take care of the engines of the ship. There are the microeconomic activities, what the company is doing well, construction, and well, now the ship is supervised by the European Central Bank, International Monetary Fund. We are under, in brackets, bailout. That means our president doesn't take all the decisions. Well, and in the case of Portugal, there is a similar study with Portugal. You see the Portugal, the farmers, the wine, and the sheep of Portugal. That's a metaphor for the Portugal analysis. Yeah. And then the conclusions. That's the. Well, we belong, Spain and Portugal, to the famous club of the pigs within the European Union. And final reflections, all economists focus their analysis on macroeconomic fundamentals or macroeconomic financial stability. That's to say the macroeconomic perspective. IMD and World Economic Forum studies consider with great detail all incumbent competitiveness variables, but also macroeconomic perspective. And Nix complements the two above perspectives, focusing preferably on human capital base and microeconomic competitiveness, intellectual capital trend, and so on the clusters where wealth is produced and their mutual relationships. Thank you very much.
So what's the progress for Spain that you give based on the microeconomic indicator? Or Portugal, you don't have to.
Well, very difficult situation because.
So there is some agreement in between the indicators, some agreement.
Yeah, the situation is similar. The worst country is Greece, practically no solution, no solution. Then comes Ireland and Portugal, a little bit better. And then there is the group of Italy and Spain. The problem of Spain and the problem of Italy are similar, but specifically the case of Spain, we don't have enough excellent companies or competitive companies. We specialize in the last 10 years in the construction, real estate business, and a big real estate and house bubble was produced. Now the bubble burst, directly or indirectly. All the construction and real estate business produce 17% of the gross domestic product. And now the problem is there is no more bubble construction, and which industry will develop that can substitute the construction sector.